Welcome to the AI Decision Guy podcast, the show where we explore the intriguing balance between artificial intelligence and human decision making. I'm your host, Dr. Carlos Kemeny, and in each episode, we dive deep into the world of AI and its impact on various industries. Ollie Hughes is the CEO and co-founder of Count, a collaborative data platform which changes how teams work with data. Where current data tools focus on creating insights, Count is built to support teams to solve problems and make decisions. Previously, Ollie served as a principal consultant at 2020 Delivery, the UK's leading public service consultancy, and held a project management role at Tesco. He graduated with distinction from the University of Cambridge, where he was a Goodley Scholar. All right. Well, I'm pleased to have this wonderful conversation with Ollie. Ollie, thank you for joining the show.
You're welcome. Hi, Carlos.
It's great to have you. In fact, you're one of the founders that I look up to so much. I am so excited about the work that you and your team have done at Count. Incredible work. And maybe we can start there. Why don't you share a little bit about Count, what you're working on, and actually what led to it? What was the reason why you started Count?
That's a long story. Thank you. That's a very flattering introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to it. So Count is a sort of we sort of call it a data exploration tool for the modern data stack. And the big paradigm shift which we're leading and challenging is the idea of using a kind of infinite canvas, a collaborative canvas board, a bit like Miro or Figma, as the kind of the primary interface which we're doing analytical work. So you can use that canvas to do data modeling, to collaborate, problem solve, or build sort of more rich, sort of contextualized reports than you would normally get in a dashboard or notebook tool. We launched it in September. I think we've had like 19,000 canvases so far. Is the kind of the thing which we love looking at. So it's been really encouraging to see people pick it up, and it's been really wonderful to see teams like really loving this kind of new way, this new paradigm way of working with data and laying it out visually to help them think through problems. It's been really, really cool to see. But you asked me about the journey. We didn't start off with this great idea. We've been going for a number of years before that. And in fact, the mission of the company has always been to try and just improve the ability to use data in a practical sense. And we started off looking at natural language querying right back in the original day, and thank goodness we didn't do that because we would never have been as good as ChatGPT at that. And then we switched to looking at a data notebook. The idea being that we wanted to, we were seeing in our research and in our own previous experience working with data in different companies, just that the kind of relationship between the data team, the analyst, and the stakeholder that they're working with can be really quite difficult to both communication-wise and just understanding and clarity between those two different worlds. And we wanted to improve that. We started off building a notebook tool, which gave analysts a way to sort of build a report kind of mode for explaining data. But we just found that a notebook tool can only go so far. It's still only a one-way communication tool. And actually, a lot of the needs for this relationship to be better is to have the business, the abusers, and the analysts, or just analysts and analysts, working together in a much more flexible way, much more iterative approach. So that's where we pivoted towards the canvas, and it's been a really great ride since.
I love the idea of the canvas. I mean, Figma definitely popularized the infinite scroll, I think, in design. But I love this applied to the data world. And part of this is because I hate having 1,000 dashboards. It's horrible. It's horrible to have users go to a specific dashboard and then you don't know the versioning and how is adoption anyway in a dashboard. So I love the collaborative space. Can you talk about the objective though? Like, so you have this space now, you're collaborating. I love a conversation that we had, I think it was about a year ago. We were talking about decision making. How have you seen this style influence the way that people act and decision off of this type of data now that it's presented in a way that's collaborative?
So to be clear, you can build dashboards in a canvas. That is possible, but it's just that the fact it's a flexible space, you can build any kind of report type, and that's really its strength. The honest answer is that I don't think, my colleague Taylor wrote an article, "Dashboards Are Dead," back in 2020, which has gone infamous in terms of its reach. And I think the answer is that we do see a place for dashboards. It's not that dashboards aren't the right solution. It's just it's overly used. It's a hammer. You like using a hammer to do all your DIY tasks, right? It's not the right solution for many circumstances, and yet, unfortunately, that's what a lot of sort of the first wave of like the data revolution relied on, was just using dashboarding tools to get numbers out. So it's not that we don't see dashboards as useful. It's just that they're not the way to make decisions, because dashboards are a operational reporting tool. Effectively, they are good for seeing a number regularly, which is already contextualized, understood, where there's kind of a very clear operational outcome of the result of reading a dashboard. They are great for that. A HUD in a kind of factory is a dashboard. And it should always probably be that. Where dashboards are terrible is when there's any ambiguity. And when it comes to decision making, when I mean decision making, I mean like less than like a gut reaction or an operational decision. I mean like more complex strategic, like a sort of weekly cadence or beyond. Those kind of decision makings where there is ambiguity in the question potentially to start off with, or there's a multifactorial decision to be made, which involves data and qualitative data and quantitative data. Those kind of decisions are poorly served by a dashboard, because there's no ability for there to be a discussion, a consensus to be reached for decisions to be weighed and evidence to be weighed up. And that's really what we're seeing in the data industry, that data teams are trying to solve these nitty-gritty strategic challenges for the business, and the tool they have to do that is a dashboard, which is completely the wrong fit for that. And the canvas is a wonderfully powerful place to lay out qualitative data and quantitative data, and that's really why it wins, is almost because it's more than a data tool, not because the data tool will tell, it can do charts like everyone else. It's the fact that chart can be next to a screenshot, can be circled, can be discussed in real time, and other iterations can quickly be made around the different topics. And that's really where it wins. It breaks down that one-way communication tool between an analyst and the business, and that leads to a certain cadence of feedback, which just slows the whole thing down or gets ignored, and allows you instead to have a kind of faster pace, more confident building process to getting to a decision. So for example, you can actually lay out a whole decision from start to finish. You can think through a problem, get requirements, think through what we do know, what we don't know in a canvas, then bring in some early and initial exploratory analysis to back up that, alongside some qualitative evidence as well, and then have a kind of decision meeting. And all that flow, all those stages are happening in one place and can be done much more organically and quickly. And that's really the workflow where it really wins, rather than trying to take screenshots of a dashboard and paste it somewhere else, and then there's follow-up questions you can't answer. And the whole thing breaks down as soon as you're trying to move between different tools.
Yeah, so maybe as an example, so when you talk about a dashboard, an operational dashboard, maybe this is how many customers do we have, which should be well established. Sometimes it's not, though, which is interesting. And I want to kind of dig into that with some of the gaps in even natural language, like a ChatGPT. So we'll reserve that for the next question here. But I think maybe that's kind of your first point, which is dashboard. If you have something that's predictable, something that's well understood, something that is well defined, great. Here's the dashboard. We look at it. We consistently can trust it. There's this other side of it, which is which new business should we go into, which is not finite. It's not, right? It's bounded. There's going to be different opinions, different incentives for different stakeholders to go into different business lines. And so now there needs to be conversation, and there has to be somebody that owns that decision. It's not just a group think, right? And so this is where I think Canvas shines then in that context, right? Where, yes, you can do the dashboard, but there's not a lot of tools that allow you to really do this well. Tableau does not do it well at all. Click does not do it well. Domo doesn't do it well. And so now what you're doing is allowing for annotations. You're allowing for the logging of conversation in real time. And I think that this is very critical because data, I've heard, this is what bothers me the most as somebody who's led data organizations, the data isn't right as a defense against not wanting to do something. Yeah. I hate that argument. And I hate that leaders never push back and to say, well, tell me where it's not right. Let's play on an even playing field then. Where do you disagree with the data? Where is your proof that this data is wrong? We never hear that from leaders. They quickly retreat because it's very right. And so what I hope that this is doing is opening up the conversation and the pathway to say, yeah, I mean, this is the conversation. This is the conversation zone.
Yeah.
and let's now come up with all of these the things on the table to make a decision, right?
Well, exactly. It's. I mean, if you think about what data teams love to do, like I run a data team myself. I used to love this kind of work. You know, the question of like where should we, what new product lines should we launch? Where should we break into a market? That kind of question is fascinating, right? It's what we love doing. That act of discovery. That it's a problem solve. Ultimately, it's problem solving with data, and it's such a wonderful experience. We all love that focus. We don't like doing dashboarding. There's a functional requirement for them, obviously, but it's not where the ROI of the data team is seen. The ROI of the data team is seen is in what they can do to answer better strategic questions to drive forward growth and help discover those growth levers. And that requires a fundamentally different workflow to what a dashboarding workflow requires, right? It just requires a different way of working, and it requires, you say, conversation. And I think a lot of this, you know, what I passionately believe is that what analysts should be considering themselves to be as problem solvers rather than data, rather than just SQL writers or anything like that. That's the mentality, because then alongside that mentality of I'm problem solver, it comes the mentality of I need to help my stakeholders think through this problem, not just provide inputs to it. I need to help them think through the evidence and be a critical friend with them to help them understand why they should trust this data. And that allows you to think through more than just show them a chart and hope they take it and believe it, which is obviously just really big ask. It encourages you to think more about how I explain the methodology, how I explain the thinking behind where I've got to, help them think through it as well. And yeah, I mean, I often think about, if I often ask people, think about imagine if you were making $1 billion decision, and an analyst came in and said, here's what you should do. Here's a chart. It says that you should do this. There's absolutely no way in hell they're going to take that chart and just take it at red and make a decision. It obviously will require them to understand how that chart's being created, the context being built in, and that to build some trust in those numbers and that outcome is a huge part of that decision-making process. And you can't do that with the dashboard. You have to. It's a black box where that number's got to, and communicating that is super important and super hard to do with the traditional BI tools. And it's ultimately, I think, to round it off, what the canvas allows is transparency and therefore greater trust in the numbers that are created.
Well, and I think that connecting these two things together, right, the dashboard and these conversations and the data that informs conversations, where I think it breaks apart for a lot of data professionals. What is the output of a data professional? It's usually a recommendation for a good, right, senior data leader. It's going to be a strong recommendation. Most of the times, I think analysts get it wrong, where they just put a lot of data together. And I've been at fault for this, by the way, in my career, where you just put a lot and you say, hey, you're the decision maker. Here's everything. Here's the good. Here's the bad. Here's the uncertainty, right? And I found that to be not very effective. Two, you kind of go up the ladder, and now it's, hey, I'm going to make a strong recommendation because I believe, I have conviction around this data, and I want the company to move a certain direction, and I know this data. So therefore, now you learn at that stage in your career that you recommend something strongly. But there's a problem. That's where it ends. That's, for a data professional, that is the end of the line. You recommend. One of the things that I think is extremely important is figuring out how to do a handoff between the recommendation and execution. Because execution, for any founder, knows this very well. There's a million pivots that may happen. There's a lot of different, things that you learn in real time that require, and there's also just conviction and motivation and grit. And so who best to lead than somebody who's, a recommendation, than somebody who now has accountability to that recommendation. And I think this is one of the challenges for data recommendations, is that a pure handoff may require some kind of adopted accountability or inherited accountability. But, what a strong motivation. And I've learned this as a founder. When you decide to go and you decide to raise capital and you decide to go after a certain solution, it's you. It's your recommendation, end to end. It's your execution. There's nobody else to blame. And I think this is one of the challenges. How do you see Canvas working in this realm, though, of accountability, where, okay, there's conversation, somebody now takes the ownership of a project, or let's say this new business line, right? They've kind of decided on that. How does this connect in Canvas? How do you see this, and evolving just in the field where now not only is a decision made, but there's accountability towards the execution of that. And how does that feed continual decision making, right? Like the data, oh, we made the wrong choice, let's retreat, or let's, right? How does that work in Canvas?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm not sure that the canvas is. What I think the canvas is trying to improve ultimately is the communication between the data team and the business stakeholder, the business owner, as you would call it, the person who has the responsibility to make the decision, and in making that relationship much more strong, positive, and turns the analyst's role or the data person's role into more than just a um, input, but being a kind of a support to that decision maker. And I think that the way that we've seen that work best is that it changes the way that the inputs are added and the way it's been built. So, for example, a case study would be one of our customers is a kind of AI company actually, and they have their marketing manager um, works really closely with the data team on their campaigns they run, and um, she actually comes into the canvas and basically builds the report she wants. Builds the kind of one classic example of how people use the canvas is to build a kind of a conversion funnel, like showing an actual funnel of numbers, so you can see each conversion step and the outcomes of each. And obviously, funnels can be quite complicated, so it lets you do that quite elegantly. But she'll build it and then ask the analyst to fill in the numbers for her and defines the definition of what she wants. The analyst comes in, provides the numbers, and then will help with follow up. But the beauty of the canvas is it gives the marketing manager somewhere to think through the problem, what she wants or what they want, brings the analyst into their world where the communication is clear. The analyst understands what's going on. The analyst then does all their analysis in the canvas with them, so that all the steps of logic are laid out clearly to be talked through with the marketing manager, so they can understand what's happening or go ask for clarification. But then ultimately the output is already in the format that she needs to make the decision, and that's so much more elegant than a request gets sent to the analyst to ask for this data. They do the queries without really knowing why. They send it across, and then there's obviously a huge and kind of painful discussion about where these numbers come from. Can I have it this way, and that way? Because there's just been much less upfront explanation organically done via a communication medium like a canvas. So I don't think, back to your question, I don't think the accountability needs to shift here. It's just that the ability for that decision to be made quickly and painlessly with all the inputs you need to make an important decision there is the kind of real win.
But I do think that there's nuance. I love the elegance of what you just talked about right there, because as work is being done, there's a conversation at every single touch point. It's not like you said, give me this, 7 days later, I get something back. And that there is a nuance there where there's an active conversation. Certainly there's work that's being done, but it's a lot more active and dynamic instead of this whole project being completed. So I love this. Tell me a little bit about data trust. Digging into, I mean, it's a big topic, but data trust and decision making. What I like is the observability and transparency that you're providing, and that is critical. I have been in a number of meetings where the CEO leans over to the CFO, disregards data, just says, "What do you think?" And that takes a lot of priority over anything that's been discussed. So data trust is incredibly important. What are some of your insights, thoughts on the state of data trust in organizations right now? And is that gap being closed to where it needs to be?
Big question. I think what I would say is that data trust, like trust in data, the usefulness of data, the ability to make data informed decisions, it varies a lot by company. I think actually in reality, like obviously the sector that you're in as a business will mean that is the ability for you to ignore or use data effectively to make decisions can vary. The outcome which you deliver can vary a lot with that. Let's be clear. If you're an artist gallery, there is a lot of that is going to be more harder to qualitatively understand than if you're say a B2B SaaS company selling software in a product led way. So it varies a lot. I think what I undeniably believe is that the ability for us to make that process better and make trust greater is a long way from where it should be. I think people mistake the theme right now in the industry is, and I think there's a lot of, I think it's right, the idea of that we should be using a lot more software engineering principles to deliver strong, accurate pipelines. But I think that people are mistaking version control with the idea of transparency, and I think we need transparency more than we need version control and understanding. And so I think we're making a decision of precision is not the same thing as is like trust as trust. Trust is helped by precision and accuracy, but it's not the same thing. And trust is ultimately what you need. The currency a data team works within is trust, right? Their main goal is clarity, and a way you drive clarity is going to come from the more trust you have, the more efficiently you can deliver that clarity, and locking away your data pipeline, making that opaque, not visible even to the data team, let alone to the wider organization, appropriately at least, can be really challenging to like drive this kind of black box mentality, which a lot of BI tools have, and that's where I think trust is very difficult. So I think the biggest win of the Canvas paradigm is well, firstly, it allows you to place to think. It's a place to where you can think through numbers. But secondly, it is the fact that it allows you to share the process and give transparency to the work that leads to a decision or an insight rather than just the insight itself. And those things together, a place to think and a place to sort of see gain trust, is a really powerful combination we're finding.
I think so. I mean, I agree 100% with that. I think that one of the things that I really believe in as well is establishing a threshold of data quality. Going to your point about the context matters. A drug company's data quality for the production of drugs is, a specific amount of, percentage threshold that needs to be met versus a marketing decision. And, understanding, I think, is an executive. And I think that executives aren't at this level of understanding, which is data quality doesn't need to be 100% of the all the time. It's completely sufficient, maybe for some use cases, for 80% data quality to lead to a decision for the added cost. I think that if companies operated this way, there would be greater trust. I think that if you have transparency, there would be greater trust. If you have trust in the person leading the data effort, there's trust. And so there's kind of this box that currently is a black box, but I think it is the data leader's job to open that up. And I think that, having the opportunity to measure trust is probably a good idea at this point in time as well. How often are data leaders going out and polling people just like an NPS and say, how much do you trust the data? Or a domain leader, how much do you trust your data to make decisions? Do you agree with that?
I hadn't even thought. I think that's. I hadn't thought of it that way. I think it'd be a very powerful tool to sort of really dig into where there needs to be I would say more as a relationship building. Like I think we talk about trust is kind of like, it sounds like it's a metric when actually, and it can be metric. Not saying you can't measure it at all, but I think really what that would show you is where does a data leader need to spend their time to build a better relationship with that function, because what we often forget is like a data team, particularly an internally focused analytics team focused on supplying decision support to the business, is a support function, and that means that their value comes in their ability to influence and help, inform decision making. So if there's low trust, then they are not they're not delivering for that department. That's a huge risk. But I think that data trust is only a portion of what they should be thinking about. They should be thinking about, how's my working relationship with this department, for example? How are we helping them? What are their biggest challenges? How can I help them see what they can do? And I think that comes back to transparency. Clarity is like ultimate metric they should be working towards. How can I give this department clarity, better decisions, understand their growth metrics, understand their operational levers they can pull to improve performance, and then to gain that trust, to help them, inform them they trust me. To get trust, I need to give them transparency. And I think that's the real there's a hierarchy there, which I probably need to think about more before I articulate it well. But that's what I think is what I think matters most. It's not just about data quality; it's about trust in the broadest sense.
I love that. I love how you've articulated that. I think that you've also maybe brought up the last segment of our conversation, an important part, because you've talked about the support function. But this is just one of the challenges of data teams is, okay, as a support function, what is the ROI? And I've seen a lot of data teams that say, well, we helped you surface this insight that created $10 million or $100 million of revenue. Therefore, our ROI is $100 million, And clearly that's not true, right? Execution is 99%. The insight is how much, right? How much is the value? But let's talk about ROI a little bit and the ROI of the support function and of the decision making that you're facilitating. How should data teams measure their impact if the objective is to change the way that people act and decide through trust? How do you measure the impact of a data team? This is something that everybody struggles with right now. And what are your thoughts on this? What is the ROI? What are the metrics of success? What is the delta that you're trying to create?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this, and I would actually recommend someone to look up is someone called Abhi Siva Salem, which I think I may have got his surname wrong, but he used to be the head of data at where he used to be. He used to be head of data at can't remember. Anyway, look him up. He's done a whole video recently at the Data Council in Austin where he talks about metric trees, and he talks about, which obviously is a wonderful thing you can build on a canvas, by the way, a metric tree. And he talks about the main purpose of a data team is to track and identify and improve the growth model of an organization. Like a data team's focus should be on identifying the growth levers of a business, tracking them, and working out to improve them. And that positions the data team far clearer into making abstract decision-making support into much more of our goal here, our prioritization should be what is going to drive growth, which is obviously the business's primary function. How well are we articulating and making visible what are the core levers of growth? How much are we able to help them predict how levers interact with each other? And I think that's a really helpful, operationally focused way of thinking about a data team's ability to drive ROI. Is their goal is not just to answer questions from the business, but is to encourage and support the business in understanding itself and what drives value. And that is, I think, ultimately a very powerful way of doing it. I really believe him in that. But I think I would go broader than that. I think a data team's ROI, when you get into a conversation about ROI, it's really difficult because you are a support function. Now, clearly, you can't. It's a symbiotic relationship here, but the most important thing is the relationship's everything. Because if the relationship is strong, then the relationship means that no one's going to question the value of the data team. If the relationship is weak, then ROI becomes a question. Like, how much is this really helping us? Because it's not. It should be undeniable in that regard. It should be. The integration here is so clear that there's no doubt in the mind of people. I think that comes down to trust. It comes down to relationship building, and it sounds really boring. It sounds very non-scientific, but ultimately, like the stronger the relationship, the more trust that's between those two parties, the more effective they'll be and the more value they'll produce. So I think that relationship is really important. I think the overarching mission of a data team is providing clarity to the business. Now that means more than just finding operational, like identifying the growth levers. That's down to like how we communicate, how we work with them, how we give people trust in our numbers. And if you think about your metric as North Star of we are providing clarity, it changes it, and think of it in the most holistic way in terms of how we communicate, how we support, how we work with people, and what we prioritize. I think that becomes a really powerful North Star for data leaders to think about. And the hierarchy underneath clarity, I think there's more to discuss there. But I think if you're in the depths of like trying to get to a number, that kind of you're in tricky ground already, basically.
Yeah, no, I love this. I think that your constant reminder about trust and relationship is critical. And I'm a big advocate for polling and surveying those business leaders, those business stakeholders then at that point, and assessing your own score. And, in terms of trust, in terms of, these qualitative, relationship measures, also speed of decision-making. How do we measure that, right? And quality of decision-making. Speed of decision-making is an interesting one because one could then orient around, well, how long should a decision last, right? As a deadline once we get the information. And how quickly then is a decision made from that point in time when the analysis is completed? I think that's measurable. And I also think it's measurable to understand when it counters the conventional thinking. When I had a good friend, a great friend that actually mapped out on a napkin for me at lunch. And he said, it's funny because in data science, we usually have, two branches. What happens when I give you information that you agree with? And what happens with when you're making a decision with information that you disagree with? And if the answer is X for both of those, that they're equal, then there's not really any work for us to do here as a data science team. And I thought that was brilliant. It's a great depiction of this reality, which is you're not going to do anything differently anyway if the data is different, right? And in many ways, I think that the value of a decision team in that context then is to speed up decisions where it does agree with someone's thinking, and to do two things: speed up decision making when it's different, and to switch the decision. And so to do that, you have to be more deliberate about capturing information about what is the conventional thinking, what is your current thought, what's the hypothesis, and then to validate. And this is where maybe Steve Blank, this idea around how many experiments did you do? That's a pretty effective way to measure. And I don't think that as a data field, we do this very well. And maybe as a final thought here, we've talked about a lot of things today, but I think that, what is your thought on AI and its, benefits to decision making in a data analytics team? What are the potential pitfalls and challenges that that we might fall into if we rely too heavily on AI for decision making?
I feel like I want to ask you a question, but I feel like what you were saying before about the decision-making framework is really fascinating, because I think if I can go back to that, if that's okay for a second. I think you're really right. I think one of the things that the opportunities for a data team to really add clarity and improvement to decision makers in an organization, and I know you mentioned this before, I know you're passionate about this, is the idea of the feedback loop. Like, how do we go back and review decisions we used to make? And the problem you've got there, if the data team is only an input to a decision, they're not part of the decision-making process and helping support that decision-making process, then the person who is making the decision hasn't really got much incentive to go back and see if they made a decision well or not. They sort of want it to be forgotten about, particularly unless it goes well. So I think actually one of the opportunities I think you can see, if you can increase that relationship, increase that foot in the door of decision support by the data team, the opportunity to allow that review process to give like that kind of 6 monthly, quarterly review process of like, did the decisions we make actually return what we thought? That is a really important, really huge, could be hugely powerful for an organization to really take a leap forward in decision making ability. So that's one thing. I mean, I think that's just maybe just clarifying what you're already saying, but I think that's worth definitely clarifying. I know it's your passion on AI. I think the answer of AI is I think it's the same. It's the same currencies when you're talking about here. It's about transparency and trust are still going to be huge, right? I think where I think we're seeing ChatGPT, for example, being really powerful is in lots of small decisions, which are basically like a Google search level of complexity or of like impact. Like, give me this answer, and it's not going to be individually. I'll take the answer as read potentially, but if it's a very important decision, I'm going to want to have more rigor and more understanding about how the answer is being got to. So I think AI has a power to input it to change how decisions are made across the let's say decision complexity. But the axis of transparency has to go up enormously as you go, as it would if you were dealing with a human being. And so I think that the interfaces that we are working with need to have the same principles that I think we've been talking about this whole discussion about. How does an analyst help a company make a decision? The same kind of idea behind that needs to be the same, of like rigor and transparency and building that trust. And trust coming from transparency is going to be really, really key, I think, there for more complex decisions where the outcome, the decision maker has to put something on the line to make that call. So I actually think there's huge potential there, but I think there's some I think there's going to be some evolution that comes as like what interfaces work really well for that, because of the fact you need to show how the decision's been reached, or how the insight's been reached. And that's actually why, personally, I think we're excited about AI in Count, because I think the canvas has such flexibility to be able to show that transparency without being really cluttered up. We're really excited to see what we can do there ourselves.
Yeah, and the thing I get most excited about Count for the future is your ability to then record and then use as input these annotations. Let me use an example where there's a pitfall in HubSpot chat. I think it's their ChatGPT integration, which I love, and I love Dharmesh. All of what they're doing is pretty exciting. But having a prompt that says how many customers do we have? Oh, if that's not an easy question sometimes, right? Sales has their number, finance has their number. People don't agree on even something like that. And why don't they? It's because the definition's never been created very rigorously. So when you talk about rigor, amen, amen. This transparency, amen, right? And this is an important problem for the AI analyst, who maybe gets too comfortable using these prompts to create. And certainly there's tools that are coming out to create automatic visualization. What about the filters? What about, applying good filters? I have never had a data set that I have really rigorously poured over and done correctly that didn't have a few filters applied. And then now you go into the pipeline. Well, how do you get the data set that doesn't require the filter? But then there's a limited, right? There's a limited scope for that data set. Now you've created more governance requirements. So there's nuance, there's trade-offs. And I think what's interesting here is governance becomes central to this conversation. Having a good data definition to each metric in a data set is requisite for using a ChatGPT to create visualization, period. That is a definitive statement, because, and I think HubSpot is indicative of this. If I ask that question, how many customers? Well, is that reliable? And if it's not the exact thing that the CFO has in his books or her books, they won't use that again. They will not rely on that as an executive team, and there's muscle memory there. And so I think that there's a lot of danger in this world where we have lax governance, and we have not buttoned that up in the analytics only world, where, without AI, and now applying AI, which then can be very reckless. Agree, disagree?
I think it's use case dependent. So I see a lot of people building kind of ChatGPT layers on top of like a semantic layer, for example, and that feels like a very safe way to provide questions and allow a very trusted environment to ask questions. But the kind of if you think about it in terms of like the scope of questions that can be answered are limited by the size and the complexity of the semantic layer. So that's fine for, again, operational questions. You could argue like it's a bit like a dashboard; it answers certain questions of certain complexity. But but AI has potential to go beyond that, and it becomes more. Then has to have a degree of more flexibility around definitions, because when you say customers, in the semantic layer, you can have a definition of this is a customer. But often, if you ask a question like how many customers do we have, the question context, the thing behind that question, the decision behind that question could mean the definition of customer needs to be different, and therefore you need AI. You need to have a different kind of AI, a different kind of workflow to get to a nuanced definition of customer for that particular context. So I have this continual tension in data world of like governance and locking down and semantic layers, and then free from analytics. And you can see there's sort of two tracks forming right now where you have people who are like very on the semantic layer side. And you have those who are actually realizing analytics needs to be a bit more flexible as a counterbalance to a lockdown environment for self-service potentially. And I think the opportunity actually of AI is to make that barrier between the two much more loose. That's what I really see, because you don't really need chat AI. Chat GPT doesn't need to, or any AI isn't really needed to do a semantic layer query on a semantic layer, because semantic layers are actually quite simple generally. It's when it can do much more free reign, like bringing information from much deeper in the data model up and make that transparent. That gets super powerful, alongside recognizing there are definitions that exist that you may want to play into and asking that for that prompt. That's my off the that's off the head. I probably want to do more thinking about that, but I think we're only at the start of this, where you're seeing AI being used as a kind of self-service, kind of very simple tool on a semantic layer, and then you have people more like Copilot AI, which is supporting an analyst to do more complicated stuff, but the thinking's being done by the analyst still. And I feel like there's the kind of matrix here, the crossover, the power is those two worlds combined much more. So you can give anyone in the business an ability to answer complex questions rather than this trivial, like single select kind of complexity of question. So I'm going to stop there because I can go on for more. But I'm also like everyone else, like thinking this through relatively real time. But it's an exciting world, definitely.
This has been a fabulous conversation, Ollie. For anybody, again, count.co. Check out Count, download, sign up. It's a fabulous tool, amazing tool. So check it out. And Ollie, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Carlos. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the AI Decision Guy podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our show. And be sure to tune in to our future episodes as we continue to explore the ever-evolving landscape of AI and its impact on decision-making. Until next time.